Thanks for tuning in to Know Wine in No Time. I'm your host, Dave, and this episode marks our 2023 spring season finale. And if you know me, I always like to go out with a bang. And in this episode, we're going to introduce you to a new category of wine that was brought forth by the Chianti Classico Consortium, and that's a classification by the name of Gran Selezione. And Gran Selezione was invented so that we could get a wine that is a ultra premium classification from the Chianti Classico area. So let's think about where that's at. So we're in Tuscany in Italy, and the greater Chianti region is the area from Siena in the south to Florence in the north. And right in the center of that is the Chianti Classico area. And when we look at how the wines delineate themselves, let's look at a Chianti Classico wine. So a wine, if you look on the label, it just says Chianti Classico. This is a wine that focuses on a single grape by the name of Sangiovese. And the wine laws in Chianti Classico say that all wines must be a minimum of 80% Sangiovese. And the other grapes have to be native indigenous varietals from that area. Now, of course, it can be 100% Sangiovese if the vintner wants it to be. So back to Chianti Classico, 80% Sangiovese and must be aged a minimum of 12 months. Now we move on to Chianti Classico Riserva. Now, 80% Sangiovese, that rule still applies, but it must be aged a minimum of 24 months before it can be sold. So now we're starting to get a more mature wine. In comes Gran Selezione. So the Chianti Classico Consortium got together and passed this law in February of 2014, and Gran Selezione's first vintage was the 2010 vintage. So what exactly is a Gran Selezione? So now Sangiovese minimums have been moved from 80% to 90%, so 10% more, a little reflective of the dominant grape in Tuscany. Also, all of the grapes that are used in a Gran Selezione wine have to be estate grown. We cannot pull them from multiple plots. They have to be your grapes, your Gran Selezione. Also, after the wine's produced, it must age a minimum of 30 months, so basically 2.5 years. So what they're trying to do, the Chianti Classico Consortium, is they're trying to compete with some of the really epic wines of Tuscany. Think Brunello di Montalcino. Also think Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, by producing a wine that is aged significantly from estate-grown fruit. They're now entering that ultra-premium category. And also the price reflects that. But because of all the restrictions that are put on a Gran Selezione, only about 8% of all production in Chianti Classico could qualify for this label. So it is a pretty exclusive club when we look at that. So when you think about, would I like this wine? I say to you, if you enjoy the Brunello di Montalcino or the Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, seek out something from Chianti Classico in the Gran Selezione area. And if you say, well, Dave, that might be difficult to find, all of Chianti Classico exports about 80% of all the wines they produce. So it might not be as hard as you think, and about 30% of that comes to the United States. When we look at Gran Selezione wines, the price definitely does go up. You can get Chiantis around the Chianti Classicos around the $20 mark. Chianti Classico Riserva is probably at the $30. A wine like this that we're about to introduce you to is in about the $80 price range. So if we think about a wine like this and you've picked one out and you're deciding what you'd like to pair it with, I say Sangiovese was God's gift to tomato sauce. And we look at some of the lower Chianti wines, perfect with pizza, pasta. But as we get to the Riservas and the Gran Seleziones, now they're a little bit more tannic, a little bit more structured, and pair better with protein and fat-rich meats. So think things like steak. So a more expensive wine, a more expensive meal. So let's go ahead and dive into one to see what you might be able to expect. I picked you one from Castello de Mileto, and this is their 2016 Chianti Classico Gran Selezione. So when I look at the wine, the first thing that we notice is the wine is transparent, and that's pretty reflective of Sangiovese. It doesn't have the highest amount of anthocyanins, the things that make purple purple, so it's a little clear around the edges and beautiful garnet and ruby. If we swirl to liberate the aromas, what we get out of the glass is somewhere between a tart Rainier cherry with a little bit of almost like spicy tobacco notes around the edges. Let's go ahead and take a sip. When we take a sip of Meleto's Chianti Classico Gran Selezione, the first thing that we notice on the front side of the palate is that beautiful bright cherry flavor, indicative of the grape. But as it starts to roll across the palate, we get that beautiful, almost like Grandpa's old cherry pipe tobacco. We get those flavors. And then we get a little bit of spices, things almost peppery, bordering on cinnamony. As it rolls across the back part of the palate, we notice the influence of the oak aging. We get a little bit of vanilla and more toasty notes to it. And finally, the overall feeling is that the wine's a little bit leathery, which really makes it perfect with high protein and high fat foods. So, as we wrap up this video and I get back and enjoy a little bit more of Meleto's creation, I just want to first thank everybody. We're almost 200 videos into KnowWineInNoTime, and I've been able to share my experiences with you, and I'm so happy that you're coming on this journey with me. So I'm going to ask you to come back next time, because soon you'll know wine in no time.